designer on the DiUS design team. We've got people coming in, but I think probably a good point to get started. I guess you're all sort of interested in accessibility, inclusion. I think that's what we're talking about today, and we've got a panel, a great mixed panel of designers, engineers, and accessibility consultants to kind of help us navigate this. So this session will be recorded, and we'll be sharing out that link to everyone who's signed up after. So I think, Kirsty, you're going to hit record. I guess what are we talking about today? We talk about digital inclusion and how it's bigger than, traditional accessibility. Whether you have a broken arm, crutches, low to no vision, or a wheelchair, whether you're navigating a self-service checkout, airport departures board, social media, or even a COVID testing site, which we've all done recently. This all takes on a completely different set of challenges. And it can be different. I guess what we're here to talk about today is technology. It enables in so many ways, but it can also be limiting if we don't do it the right way. In the prioritization of rushing to design and build, I'm sure most of us work in software or have something to do with software. We know what it's like. It's often a horse trading game, of what's important now, what's important next month. So I guess from my own point of view, I guess technology is an enabler for me and in my family. I have poor vision, corrected with glasses. I have a titanium hearing implant in my right ear, otherwise I'd be completely deaf in my right ear and not have much hearing in my left. And I grew up with a close relative, who's blind and relies on his iPhone and his Apple Watch. So, everyone has their own experience of the challenges of technology, but I guess we want to kind of make the definition broader and realize that accessibility benefits everyone. So for DiUS especially, I guess we work with design. We work from back end to front end. So we obviously have the unique opportunity to build inclusivity and accessibility into all the work we do at the foundations, which is something we always recommend and we always are pushing for. So I guess what we're here to talk about today is with our great panel who will introduce why is this so hard and what can we do to possibly change things. So a couple of notes before we get started. We do have a Slido. We have the link in the chat, which you'll be able to see in the top of your screen. We'll use the QR code there. Captions, you can activate captions for Google Meet down in the bottom right of your screen. Doesn't always do a brilliant job at translating, but it's pretty amazing. And most importantly, the panel. So you've met me. We have a range of people. We have Andras, Ina, Adem, and Natalie. And I'll let everyone introduce themselves. So I hand over to Andras.
Hi. I'm a software engineer. I've been with DiUS for about 9 years. And I guess a lot of my accessibility experience with building accessibility into technology is across web and mobile. So working with Australia Post, Qantas, and heaps of other stuff in between. I've been going to accessibility camp and bites and a few other conferences and UX conferences and stuff for a while. So I've got a bit more interest and background than a lot of devs with less experience. But anyone can pick it up anytime. That's me.
Cool. And Ina?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ina Fora. I'm a senior experience designer at Our Very Own. Our Very Own is a consultancy focused on human-centered design to help organizations solve the right problems and get more ideas into the market. My design experience spans across 11 years, both digital and physical. And accessibility has been a big part of my life, both personally, friends and family. And as a designer, it's not only the work that I do with my clients, the hackathons that I attend, both as a mentor and also partake, but I also help champion the conversation within my own organisation and externally with Adem. We actually run a meetup specifically on this topic to help create awareness.
Great, thanks, Ina. And Adem?
Yep, hi everybody. My name's Adem Cifcioglu. I'm one of the co-founders of Intopia and a digital accessibility consultant now for since the early 2000s. So let's call it sort of just under 20 years now. Intopia is an accessibility consultancy that helps people make digital things usable and accessible to everybody. And that's me.
Great, thanks. And Natalie?
Yep. Hi, so I'm Natalie. I'm an experienced designer with DiUS. I've been at DiUS for around, I think, 18 months now. And in my career, I've worked across a range of different products across different industries. I'm particularly interested in how technology impacts people's lives for the better, and also how, as consultants, we can help educate in this space as well.
Great, thank you. I'll just stop presenting the slide pack and we can get started. I guess the big question for today is we've said accessibility is for everyone, but what's your point of view? Who wants to kick off there?
I'm happy to go. Happy to go first. So I think really there's no exemption that any business can get when it comes to designing for accessibility. And I think that all businesses, regardless of size, should be striving to make their products available to everyone. I was doing some research before this, and around or just over 4 million people in Australia actually experience some form of disability. That's a pretty significant number. So I think that, if your business isn't designing for accessibility, you are, potentially excluding some of those people and also missing out on their business. So I guess in summary, I think accessibility isn't something that businesses should see as, well, I can opt into this or I can opt out. It's a nice to have. It really is essential if you're designing products and services.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, it's really not much of a thing that a lot of businesses initially go into thinking about or talking about, but there's a lot of accessibility issues that people have that aren't visible or obvious, and even just temporary or transient issues that people can have, like getting older or getting injured or anything, can affect anyone at any time. So it's something that you can always build in that always helps everyone, and even things that help people with like low mobility or low visibility issues can help people that don't identify with having any issues.
Yeah, for sure. Adem, I mean, you're consulting directly with businesses. What are you saying here?
So I think just to pick up on what's already been said, I think for me, accessibility in a word is independence, right? It's the ability to perform a task, do whatever it is that you want to do independently. And in our context, that's with the use of technology. So making sure that whether it's a website, a mobile app, a device, whatever it might be, any sort of technology or anything digital is usable and accessible to anybody who wants to use it, to allow them to independently do whatever it is that they want to do.
For sure. I guess we wanted to make this session pretty practical as well. So we wanted to provide some tips for creating more accessible solutions in a variety of situations. I guess, Ina, have you got anything? Where could people go to really find out more?
Yeah, there's a lot. So I'm more than happy to list off, and I know there's going to be a recording, so you can reference that after. Firstly, the web content accessibility guidelines. I know that they're a little bit dry, but it's something that's really important to get an understanding of what the guidelines are to help us ensure that we're creating an accessible product for people with disability, and it's universal. There's things like Udemy. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's Udemy. They run a few different courses on the topic. EDX also have free courses that they have, and you can get a certificate that you can pay for as well. Intopia, also, I'm not getting paid to say this, provide internal training for different teams in your organisation. Free tools like readabilityguidelines.co.uk, written by Sarah Richards, and it's specifically for people who want to know more about content, UX, writing, and making it accessible. Ali Projects is a really good open source, community-driven tool that you can access, and it has really good checklists that you can look through. Books like Accessibility for Everyone, written by Laura Kelbag. And as a designer, there's so many things that you can use that are free. So if you're using Figma, Sketch, or Adobe XD, Stark is a really good plugin. And for Chrome, you can use No Coffee, which is basically a tool that can show you what it looks like with someone who has different levels of vision impairment. Lighthouse, Arc Toolkit, and AXE is also a really good Chrome plugin. And the community is small. So if you want to get involved, conferences like Ali Camp and Ali Melbourne Meetup is a great place to also start and get involved in the community.
And I think just to jump in there to add one to that. So the W3C, who sort of govern the accessibility guidelines, let's say, have also got a whole stack of resources that are a lot more understanding than the technical guidelines that we kind of as accessibility people work through. But there's also some let's call it some more plain language, understandable stuff up there as well.
Yeah, I know from my own experience, like it can range from pretty technical to that sort of plain language help as well. I mean, Andras, is there anything that you use or work using day to day that can help?
Pretty much, listed all the stuff. The only other kind of thing that I could recommend paying attention to is just other communities. So there are like charity hackathons like Random Hacks of Kindness that help out groups that need this kind of help, and others is kind of more social and advocacy groups like Able Gamers or anything like that help support different sub-communities rather than just accessibility in general or disability in general.
Great. We're a question for Natalie. I mean, so we talked about sort of projects and the work that we do. I mean, for you, what happens when you're brought into a client as a consultant to help deliver a solution that you've been asked to develop? I mean, how do you influence in that space when people, want to do, I guess, the minimum?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a real mix with DiUS. We work with obviously quite large corporates through to smaller startups. So in some instances, when we're going in, there's already, established processes, there's accessibility teams in place. In other instances, it's more to sort of what you were talking about, like they might not have started that journey yet. And maybe they might be a little bit apprehensive as well. I think often, some clients in my experience, they worry that, okay, if I have to make my product accessible or meet the accessibility standards, I'll be compromising on design. It's going to cost more, it's going to take longer. So I think part of what is a great opportunity for us to do as consultants is to help educate them on that and just show that, hey, it's really not that hard. Also, you don't have to do everything at once. We can start small and then they can build on that. I think it's good to have that conversation up front before you start build. So just to start the conversation, see where they're at, what their thoughts are. I've never, I mean, maybe I'm lucky, but I've never come across a company that's flat out just not wanted to do it. It's more just they maybe don't understand what's involved. So from a design perspective, I'll often talk through things like, hey, we just need to make sure that we've got enough contrast with the colors we're using. Our fonts are big enough. We've got focus states. Andras, you can probably talk better than I can, but there's stuff from also a developer's perspective that can be done as well. So I just think showing them that it's not that hard, and as a project team, we can help you on that journey and kind of take some of that responsibility, and then hopefully they can take it forward.
Yeah, I think that's the idea of laying a foundation. From the very beginning, thinking about as you said, sort of contrast font sizes just as a very basic minimum. But I guess Andras, what's your take on that, sort of building that foundation from a tech point of view? What are the sort of things that you like to see happen, and what are you pushing for?
Yeah, it's abstractly, it's kind of maybe sometimes a harder thing to think about, but just like any kind of application code base, you've hopefully got some kind of architecture. I go into places where they don't even have that, so it's a bit hard to get things like accessibility in at the end. But if you think about that stuff from the ground up, if you've got a reusable component library that already has the right kind of labeling and contrast and everything built in, that can really help. Or if you've got something like that and it's not accessible yet, but those components are used consistently everywhere, if you fix it in one spot, that should fix it in other spots. Other things to help remind design and product people about is not using colors only to indicate different kinds of states, not trying to use brand colors to represent everything in your app all the time, because they're often not as good contrast as you need. But yeah, no, really on the tech side, just kind of thinking about localization, thinking about accessibility. You can build it in all the same way as unit tests and screen driver tests, and get good coverage and be notified when things break, because someone changed a label in a component and now all these screens don't pass the accessibility tests. And then the last thing is probably, if you are targeting things like screen readers, sometimes you have really complex components that are hard to read, and you can just replace what the screen reader would read with something that is actually understandable as a sentence. Just as quick examples of that.
Yeah, great. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, go for it, Adam.
Go on, Anna. You go.
No, you go.
So I just to add a couple of things on the tech side of things. I think one of the things that, and being an ex sort of developer myself, this is one of the things for me that that comes up a lot, particularly because sometimes when we talk to clients about accessibility, like was being said before, it's not that they don't want to do it, it's just that they don't necessarily know what to do or how to do it. So particularly from a development perspective, the first thing I start with is for websites and web apps, HTML is probably 75% of what you need to do. So good standards compliant HTML, using buttons as buttons, using links as links, using HTML select boxes for your drop-down menus, all that sort of stuff that is available in HTML. If you use what's there, it sort of gives you the accessibility out of the box. You don't have to think about going, oh, do I need an event handler to make sure it works with a keyboard? Do I need to do something special to make sure that someone who's using a screen reader will announce what needs to be said, the labels, all that sort of stuff. It's all available in HTML. So if you start by using what's there and then enhance on top of it. So if you need a component that does a bit more, start with the base, build on top of that, because hopefully you bring along the default sort of accessibility with you, and then anything you need to build in on top of that you can do, but it makes it a lot easier. And I'll hand back over to Ina. Sorry for jumping in.
No, not at all. So yeah, just similar to, and just to add on to what everyone else is saying, I think it's really important to have that upfront conversation at the start and get also an understanding of why it could potentially be a minimum requirement. You know, there are so many reasons. Is it a lack of money? Is it a lack of time? Is it a lack of understanding? Or is it, you know, return on investment, which is a lot of the time that's the kind of the conversation that comes up. It is a lot about the education, and it's also about shifting people's attitudes and perceptions and invoking empathy and awareness. And it's so important to be able to do that. And you can do that through, you know, in an ideal world, it would be great to have user testing with people who have various disabilities. But if you aren't able to do that, there's other ways you can do it. You can run workshops internally. You can run a brown bag similar to this with a team on this topic. You can use free browser plugins and show what your site or your software looks like and what the standards are, similar to the ones that I pointed out before. So there's definitely things that you can do that doesn't require extra money to at least start the conversation and create that awareness.
Yeah, you mentioned return on investment there as well. I think being able to show the impact of the changes that you've made back to stakeholders can be a fantastic experience for the team as well as, you know, the stakeholders as well. Adam, I guess a question for you. Like, Ina and I met you a fair while ago when we were at NAB. Yep. I mean, how did you make accessibility a factor in sort of, you know, a large organization?
So I think the thing with large organizations is they've got the resources to do pretty much anything they want. So it's about sort of looking at how things get done and understanding the organization. And accessibility is one of those things where the goal can't be, okay, we've decided to do accessibility now, we're going to be accessible overnight, because that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for a large organization. It's not going to happen for a medium-sized organization. It's not going to happen for a small organization, right? This stuff does take time. And the way we made it work at NAB was it was an incremental shift, right? And my attitude's always been anything that's better than what's in production today is good enough to go out tomorrow. And then you build on top of that. So, you know, in terms of getting that buy-in, I can't remember who said it earlier, but start small, because that is absolutely the key. Are you a designer working on a small project? Look at your designs for that project. Look at your brand palette. Look at things like contrast and go, okay, I can't, if I'm going to use the brand palette, I can't use the primary colors, but can I use the secondary colors, or, you know, colors that are similar that no one's necessarily going to notice the difference? For example, you know, can you do small things to make sure that from a design perspective your designs do meet the requirements? They are, you know, they pass contrast. You've got you're using headings for different sections of pages, that sort of stuff to break up content and make it easier to read. There's really simple things that you can do that are in your control. Same with developers, right? You've got one component that you're working on, so start with that component. You know, you don't have to look at the website as a whole and go, okay, in order to make this accessible, we've got to tear it down and start again. Because yes, that's one way to do it, but that's usually the one way that gets pushed back straight away.
Yeah, that's great. I guess in your experience of, and I guess you can talk generally, just what have you seen the impact be, I guess, with these small changes?
So I think Ina mentioned it earlier when she said usability testing. Now, one of the things that we see a lot in our work, because we do usability testing with our clients, is that before and after, right? Of they've had people do some testing with the product before they've made the accessibility changes, and sometimes that's why we've been engaged, because they've done some testing and it's they've realised that, well, we've put it in front of people and it doesn't work. It might not work with whether it's screen reader, whether it's screen magnifier, something like Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is basically voice-based activation type software. And then you do the work, you make some accessibility fixes, you put it back through usability testing, and it's gone from, oh, this doesn't work for me, to, oh, this works really well, or this is great, it'd be great if you could tweak this bit or that bit, but pretty much works nicely. So it's the impact is, well, I mean, the impact is demonstrated when you see that change. And also I think the other thing is, even if it's the smallest change, right? And I was talking about contrast before. There's the biggest shift going from a web page or a website with low contrast to a web page or a website with higher contrast, because it just makes it infinitely more readable to everybody. So that's not even specifically, just for those with accessibility requirements. It's just everyone.
Yeah, I did see there was the example of, I guess, Nike recently, who had designed a pair of shoes for a customer with cerebral palsy, who had highlighted the fact that how difficult it was to put shoes on. But taking it into consideration, not only solving a problem for him, but for everyone else who hates doing up their shoelaces every morning. And they've got these amazing and unique designs as well. Have you seen, could you talk to any more about maybe impact of accessibility and design?
The impact?
Have you got any examples that you've seen?
I think that just even small examples that we may not actually even be aware of, that we even notice. Like a few years ago, there was Coles came in with a in the news for not being able to allow someone who is legally blind access, an online shopping to be able to buy something. So she had to go through a what are they called? A call center to be able to actually order something online. And from that, it actually had a flow-on effect. And they are now considered one of the most, I'm not sure like what the phrasing is, but it's like one of the most, I wouldn't say accessible organizations, but in regards to how they approach accessibility, it's so much more than just that online experience now. It's actually turned into what that experience is like inside the supermarket. So, once a day, once a week, they actually turn off the music and dim the lights and turn off the sound on the scanners, and have more staff on for people who have sensitivity issues, so that when you can come in, you can have an experience without feeling like you're attacked. So that wouldn't have come through unless that had actually happened. So something like that, I don't personally enjoy going to a supermarket and being bombarded with like lights and everything. So knowing that you can actually go to a supermarket and you don't have to have sensitivity issues to be able to do that. So I think, as Tom, as he mentioned, like, with Nike creating those shoes, like, just because it was designed for a specific person with a type of disability doesn't mean that it's not accessible to other people. If not, it's actually more accessible to a wider audience. So I think it's even more important to be able to include people with various disabilities in your user testing, to actually uncover and unpack a lot of these things that could help more than just the people that you think that are a minority. So
yeah, I
for
think
sure.
it goes to embracing difference or constraints, or whatever it might be, because that shoe from Nike is going to be absolutely beneficial for that customer that they originally built it for, but I'm sure it's going to be beneficial to millions of others as well.
For sure. And you can see, I mean, we've been talking about software, been talking about screens, but I guess that physical and then surface level with Coles, as you get larger, I guess the impact can be even larger. That's great. I guess a question for everyone. Where does everyone see we are headed with accessibility? We talked about Coles there, but any other examples of people or companies doing it particularly well?
I was doing a bit of research, and I thought there was a case study on Shopify, and I thought that was quite interesting because they made a decision rather than create an accessibility team to focus on a shift towards a more inclusive and accessible culture within the company. So what they did is establish new processes for the existing product teams, educated the employees, and I think really empowered them to take responsibility or ownership for that in their product development or their day-to-day work. And I just thought, that was a really interesting approach, and I think one that, you can see would be successful in the long term. I think sometimes when there's an accessibility team, it can be easy to go, oh, well, kind of they'll take care of it. Or, if there's someone looking after the design system, it's like, well, they'll make sure that all the components meet the guidelines and all I have to do is kind of drag and drop. So I think, empowering individuals and empowering teams and giving them the tools and resources they need is a really good thing. So I thought that was a interesting case study.
Yeah, diversity of experience. Yep.
I think as accessibility just kind of as an area of concern becomes itself more accessible, people have generally have a higher awareness of it than they used to. Hopefully that just keeps growing. But like the shared vocabulary is building, and advocacy and championing internally and externally is also growing. So it's not just like apps and products, but also communities. So it's really interesting to see things like Able Gamers. And I think people come and talk at conferences and stuff from them as well, just to talk about the good and the bad stories about things that have happened to them, different ways game companies have responded. But even just knowing that people that have like low vision or mobility issues find some developers really good and some developers just like uncooperative is an interesting thing. I think internally as product development and delivery people, we can always stand to be more strong advocates and champions for any of these kinds of concerns. I think Ina and I shared a story at one client that we were at where they replaced the it was like a PDF, or it was a big block of content that was like a license or a some kind of
like Slido or something like that. It was you weren't able to, basically a reader would not be able to read the information, and it just noticed it as an image rather than text. And we actually showed them what the experience would look like. We would turn the reader on and show them what that experience looked like, and they're just like, oh, okay. So it's what was the word that they said? It's out of my
it's above my pay scale.
Yeah, it's above my pay scale. Yeah, I'm like, oh, okay.
Which comes back to it's everyone's job.
Yeah.
No matter which position you're in, it's up to everyone to think about this and be inclusive, and it seems like it really is for the benefit of all as well. We're picking up on companies. I think Microsoft has traditionally been sort of a bit of a big bad, but I really quite often refer to the material that they have. I mean, they've made great strides in with their Xbox and making that accessible, designing accessible controllers, to open up their products to a whole new market, which I mean, of course, benefits them and their bottom line, but it also benefits everyone as well. I guess, where are we headed with accessibility? I mean, what do you think the next frontier is?
I don't know that we've solved or we've moved past the previous frontier just yet. I think, and we've been talking about it here. I think we're definitely on the right track. We're on the right path of enablement, accessibility, and independence, and I think that's kind of the key for me. The positive byproduct, I think, or semi-positive byproduct of COVID, if we can say there is one, is that there's a lot more of that enablement happening. I mean, working from home is something that now effectively everyone can do with no pushback. It means, though, that we're more and more reliant on technology, and therefore accessibility becomes even more important. And while before it may have been oh yeah, this is definitely something that we should do to kind of check the box. Now, because we're so reliant on technology even more than we were before, it's now one of those more critical things to kind of go, well, it's got to work for people, otherwise we're going to lose business, we're going to lose customers, we're going to lose employees because they can't do whatever it is they need to do. And I think for me, that's probably the next frontier of accessibility. Is it's gonna go sort of wider and sort of forwards in a kind of forwards direction, if that makes sense. Probably more than it has been in the past. And there's been an upward trend, and we've been doing some really great things. And you mentioned Microsoft, and their inclusive design toolkit is great. We refer to it when there's been a lot of sort of organizations and people refer to that toolkit because it's so good. There's also the fact that accessibility technology is now sort of built into the mainstream. Your iPhone's got a screen reader built in. It's got magnifying tools. Same with Android. So as more and more of these products are built, accessibility is just becoming included with them as products and services are being launched. And I think that for me is the next frontier, is more of that happening.
I think there's kind of two general tangents that I can extend that in as well. I went to Google I/O a couple of years ago now, and they were just releasing kind of really new kind of cutting edge for them, just pushing boundaries of how many different ways of giving users access to what's on the screen or what's coming out of the speakers can we provide. So they started adding numbering to different elements on the screen so that you could quickly click on things by just talking to your phone and say like on number 1 rather than trying to read out the labels and match everything. Auto captioning was a new quick thing for any audio that was coming out of the device, not just like videos on YouTube or something. So like you could automatically caption phone calls and stuff that you were listening to. And then I guess the other kind of side that I wanted to talk about is I think there's a bit more of a push as awareness grows that accessibility isn't just the stereotypes that people are used to. So there's even new kinds of things that people haven't thought about, like motion sensitivity, which has accessibility controls being built into Chrome and other web browsers for a while now. So I think the awareness is helping people that don't identify as being disabled in any way still might notice that they have some issues with some things that they never would have found out about without this kind of assistive technology being added. So I think that's kind of a bit of a future thing. It's getting less obvious, a bit more vague, but a bit more holistic.
Yeah, sure. I think with there's a picking up a thread that we've sort of heard a lot about, just the foundation, making kind of small steps, incremental steps, using the tools that already exist. Andras was just talking about sort of what Chrome gives us. Adem was talking about sort of what HTML itself gives us out of the box. I know as designers it can be hard to resist to customize everything. I guess, Natalie, I guess when you're working these days with design systems, and I think a lot of the work we do just starts there, how are you sort of balancing that customization and standard kind of UI?
Yeah, there's always a bit of tension there, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think that the guidelines, they're pretty clear, and I think as a designer, you know in the back of your mind when you're pushing the boundary and maybe pushing it too far. Whether it's font sizes or whatever it might be. But I think sort of just being able to compromise a lot of the time I'll go in, and I think someone mentioned it before, you're working with an existing brand palette that's been designed. So many of them are just not that great in terms of contrast. So we'll often have to kind of just look at tinting colors a bit darker so that you get the contrast level. So just making those small adjustments.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've probably got a few questions from the audience. Have we got some come through, Kirsty, on Slido?
Yes, we have two, and don't be shy, anybody, or maybe, if it's easier, you can just pop them in the chat window, but I'll read out the first question. So this question is: keen to hear more about Andras or anyone else on the panel who has built accessibility testing into their CI CD. Any examples or learnings you can share. I think this is a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. So especially with newer frameworks like test frameworks like Jest, you can do things like snapshot testing of components, which will capture pretty much all the stuff that comes through in the HTML. So if you're expecting ARIA labels or just the text, if you strip out all the HTML and just take the text that's left on the screen, you can make sure that that hasn't disappeared or been formatted differently if you have that built into your unit testing. The other side of UI testing is not accessibility focused, but a lot of UI testing tools are driven through accessibility labels. So if your app is kind of accessible and unambiguous in the first place, it'll make it a lot easier to write the UI tests. And if you're not overloading the UI tests with like weird symbols and stuff just for testing, then your app is probably doing a lot better than it could be anyway. That's my probably two main things.
That's great. So adding some automation in there and taking some of the labor out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then the other question, which I think everybody kind of touched on anyway, which is, what's the next frontier? Oh, okay, hang on. Someone said those are code testing. How about user testing?
Yeah, I guess user testing is less CI/CD, but absolutely.
Maybe Natalie or Ina can probably add to that, or Adem.
Yeah, look, I think for me, do as much testing with real users as you can, because you can tick all the boxes for all the guidelines and bring out the nice certificate and say, hey, we comply with the accessibility guidelines, and that's great until you put it in front of someone and they tell you it doesn't work with the technology they're using or they can't use it. So the more usability testing you do, the better, particularly with people with disability, because there's such a variance in disability. It varies from person to person, right? My experience as someone who doesn't use assistive technology on the web but uses a wheelchair is very different to someone else's experience who does use assistive technology to use technology, and it's kind of the same thing, right? One screen reader user is not the same as the next screen reader user. One voice access user on the Android is not the same as the next voice access user. So as much usability testing as you can will make a better product for everybody.
For sure.
Okay,
Natalie
great.
or Ina, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree with Adam. Try and do as much testing as you possibly can. If money is an issue, you can always, go out and into like the communities or look at Facebook and social media. Another thing is, like, I was using, for example, a tool called Usability for recruiting people. They don't have a filter at the time that I was using it to, look at like an option to see if anyone has a disability to be able to get them inside. But reaching out to them and speaking to them and asking, like, at the time I was testing voice and getting someone who is, hard of hearing, for example, or someone who has a cochlear implant, and having that as a filter to get an understanding that when you're coming in, is the volume at the right level? Is it the content that is read out? Is it understandable? So there's definitely ways around the tools that are currently available if you can't actually find something that actually can help you. So wherever possible, try and be a little bit creative, I guess.
Great. Kirsty, was there?
There was just, I'll just have a look. Just one more, which is what emerging technologies are having the biggest impact on usability. But I think you guys probably really touched on that. I think that was actually my question.
Voice.
Yeah. No.
Voice tech, I think, is the next thing.
Yeah, that's what I wondered, because I think we do at DiUS, we do a lot with machine learning, and a lot of that conversational AI is one of the most popular manifestations in the market. So voice makes sense to me.
Yeah. And just out of interest, Adam, I guess with voice, I mean, it's hard enough at the best of times to get Siri or Alexa to do what you want. How are they trying to improve those products, do you think, to try and work more inclusively?
It's a good question, and I'm kind of going to answer a little bit out of the box and less accessibility centric, because I think the example I've got is with one of my parents. So English is a second language, and I've seen the improvement of, in our case, it's been I think it's Google now, the sort of the Google Assistant, whatever that's called, and I should know that because I'm an Android user. But the whole OK Google thing, because for my dad in this case, it's been able to pick up and understand his accent and the voice much better in the newer versions than perhaps it did in the previous version. So I think just the technology is just getting better, and for anyone who's working with voice tech, the sort of more common, less technical words are probably going to be the ones that people are going to use. So if you're looking at things like trigger words to perform actions, use the most commonly understood word for that particular thing. Or sort of, do your best to do that. You're not always going to get it 100%, because language is a scale and people will use it differently. But the sort of the easier it is to do that, and the more common the language used, then the better the result will be.
Yeah, and I guess that we touched on sort of automation and being able to scale things as well. I guess with ML and AI, training things at scale, and talking about the improvement with your dad's picking up your dad's intent and actions. I guess if we were going to do that manually, maybe it wouldn't happen so quickly. So maybe that's sort of one of the new frontiers as well. Sort of how do we use ML and AI and all that it does, what it's good at, to be more inclusive. We already know that there can be issues there. Is there anything else, Kirsty? I think we're coming up against the end of our time. No? No one wants. If there's any questions from, anyone in the audience wants to ask a question, we've got 5 minutes left.
I guess while there's a gap, there's something I can add for devs,
Yep.
which is when you get feedback or requests to change stuff, don't take it personally, because they're not challenging like your code or the quality of the work that you've done. It's just identifying issues that could make it hard to use or hard to work with. So yeah, absolutely lean into it, get as much feedback as you can and act on it. And not just for devs, for anyone.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, you know. Try and think about this from the start. Incremental changes to kind of create a foundation. You know, rely on the technology and what it does out of the box to give you a better base. You know, all these things are what we see when we hear the conversations around, well, we don't have time in the sprint, or we don't have the budget, or you know, it's a good way to turn around the conversation. Because if we do it from the beginning, it's a lot easier. Okay, great. I guess we're coming up to the end of our time. Just like to thank everyone. So Natalie, Adem, Ina, Andras, thank you so much for being part of our panel today. I mean, as we mentioned before, this is being recorded and we'll be sharing the link for that as well. So thanks everyone for coming. And if you've got any questions, I'm sure you can shoot them through to us and we can endeavour to answer.